All right, guys. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Results Loading podcast hosted by Prosperous AI. I'm your host, Michael Atkin, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Dan Hoskins, founder CEO of XProd.ai. Dan and I met through a mutual colleague as our backgrounds lined up a little bit and had some potential synergy. So we're thrilled to have him on today. Dan, thanks for being on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah, Dan. So want to dive right in here. Typical entrepreneurial come up story. Have had several cushy corporate jobs in the past. Chose to go back to school, and the birth of XProd. XProd was kind of born at that point. Can you talk a little bit about how you went from the corporate jobs? You're doing a lot of engineering back in the day for them. Talk to us a little bit about your decision to return to school, and then in the genesis of XProd and how we kind of got to this point now.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Michael. I think where it started was in college at Case Western. I was studying engineering, but didn't really know that I wanted to be an entrepreneur until like later on in college. But I knew that kind of had to wait. I didn't know how to get started right away. So went to work at Verizon. It was like this rotational program where I got to have a mix of like engineering jobs, software engineering, but also like product management, product ownership during other times. I worked there for 3 years. And while I was working there, I kind of encountered AI and encountered NLP and realized how transformational it would be, and kind of just really had this curiosity to go learn a lot more about it, learn the technical details, learn how to sell it, learn all those different things. And so that drove me to want to go back to school. And so went to get a master's in AI at Carnegie Mellon, and that's where I just graduated.
Congrats on the graduation, man, and obviously a fantastic industry to be in. AI absolutely taking over the world at this point. So glad you're up to date and educated on that to the fullest extent. At what point did you identify a pain point in the market when you kind of started thinking to yourself, you know what, I could probably do this, and you started thinking about the idea around XProd, and can you talk to us a little bit about what XProd does and what you see the direction being for the company?
Yeah, so XProd helps product leaders prioritize their roadmap initiatives more accurately. We see a lot of different companies in this space that are, giving insights about your different data. They, aggregate your data from, customer conversations and different sources. But we want to take it a step farther. We think that the actual pain point that these product leaders have and product managers have is being able to figure out which among all their roadmap ideas are the best ones that are going to not only align with customer expectations, but also align with the business strategy and business vision. So that's what XProd helps users do. The way that it really started differently. It started as a subset. It was first at Verizon and as an intern at Amazon, did a lot of user interviews, and I knew what I heard anecdotally from those interviews, but I didn't I wanted something more concrete. I wanted numbers, and I wanted a real good summary about those interviews. And so that's kind of the genesis of it. But then when I was working with the team at CMU and everything, we started to learn that maybe that wasn't the biggest pain point. Maybe there is a bigger pain point. And that's when we started to narrow in on the prioritization thing.
So when you say team, this started as a class project, correct? Or this was part of some sort of curriculum at Carnegie Mellon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, actually, so the first one, like the whole user interviews concept, started in this past fall. That was as part of a class, is digital service innovation. We'd each get up and pitch our ideas, and we'd get a team to work on it, and it would culminate in this big pitch competition at the end of the semester. So that's what the first one was. The second one was kind of transitioning from that. It was called AI Venture Studio. It's this class where you all get together, and pretty much the whole point is to build out an AI startup. And so that's what happened in the second one. And during that time, we ended up pivoting to what XProd is now.
Okay, and so how often do those companies from that class eventually end up being real life companies that you and your other colleagues end up pursuing? I mean, is that pretty typical according to your professor or around the other colleagues at Carnegie Mellon, that it's like, oh, you know what? I was planning on going and working for, Amazon or whoever, but we may be onto something here, and maybe we should stick around and keep developing this idea.
Yeah, well, I think that the way I understand it is this is the first time they resumed it. Like there was a class they had kind of similar a few years ago, but there was this hiatus and some structural thing. And so it didn't happen for a while. This is the first semester we've resumed it. As far as I know, we're the only company that is working full time after on it after the course. But I think that there are some successful companies, probably not any that are like household names, but there are some successful companies that came from a few years ago from similar classes at CMU.
Okay. So how did the pitch competition go? I mean, did you guys absolutely crush it if you've, taken the initiative to continue on with XProd?
Well, yeah, I think we did really well. So the first class, the pitch competition, we actually came in first place. But that was actually for our old idea. And that was kind of one of the things that was difficult for me is because okay, we won first place in this 12-team pitch competition with the idea for the user interviews concept. But then we're starting to see from even doing more interviews, that maybe there's an even more promising idea. So that created a lot of tension because it's man, I'm kind of married to my baby at this point. I really want to build it out, but I also have to see everything objectively and know that a pitch competition isn't the real decider. The real decider is the customers and the viability of the concept, right? And so that's when that made that decision really difficult, but we ultimately did end up pivoting to the concept that XProd is now.
It's a good call. I mean, I think especially in the startup world, validity from others and outside sources is really important. We take it really seriously. So it's a perfect example. It's oh, we won this pitch contest and it's hard to part ways with it, but deep down, we have a better idea on the books here that we haven't even begun to execute yet. But it's we kind of need to get away. Obviously, we got that validation from winning the pitch competition, but I have a better idea and we need to go with that, right? I mean, that's kind of what went through your head. Because tell me a little bit about your team and how where you started and then where you are now. Because this has obviously been over the course of a couple of years at this point. Talk to me a little bit about the development of the XProd team and the previous company before XProd to where we're at now and in what direction we think we're headed at this point.
Yeah, so the team at XProd now, I'm working, really lucky to be working with a couple of really good co-founders. One is one of my best friends, Matt Koch, who I grew up with, went to high school with, played sports with, and all that. He's our chief operating officer. He's got really strong go-to-market skills, and he's been a strategy consultant at Deloitte and project manager at Meta, where he's had a lot of experience of prioritizing initiatives. So that's been really great working with him. We have this really complementary skill set, where I'm on more of the technical side and he's more on the go-to-market and and we both kind of share in the vision, and so that's really helpful. Then we have a chief product officer, that's Daniela Decoud, and she has been a head of product at a 40-person fintech startup. And so, she has a lot of experience and is really able to empathize uniquely with these product leaders. And so that's been really helpful as well.
Absolutely. It's all about the team, right? I mean, I think they say the first 10 members of your startup team will make or break the entire company. So got to pick them right, and you got to pick them right out the gate. There's no time to be messing around with this and that until you're, 100 some person company, and it matters a lot less. But those first 10 are critical in terms of the outcome of what the company's going to look like or even exist a year from now.
Yeah, and it was tough because we had a really good team. We actually had 7 people working on the concept, this spring as part of that AI Venture Studio course. And going through that, it was kind of an exercise in seeing who's most bought in, who is really going to be in it for the long term, because, and that's kind of where it comes in this question of talent versus buy-in, and really buy-in is going to win 10 out of 10 times, right? And so that's what you got to figure out.
Especially in this industry, man, it's all about the commitment and especially all about the buy-in as well. I think you hit it right on the head there, because there's a lot of talented people out there who wouldn't fit in with the culture and ultimately would help sink the ship. The most talented people aren't necessarily the best thing for startups at this stage. So I'm glad you recognized that early. And it sounds like those 7 turned to 1, right? Because your 2 co-founders were not part of that original class, that course. Correct?
Daniela was, but
Daniela was.
Matt came on board kind of around the March timeframe.
And so the other five obviously dropped off, ended up pursuing other avenues once they graduated or the semester ended or whatnot.
Yeah, and it was tough because like there were, a lot of them were great. A lot of them were really talented in their own right and everything. And so it's a question of, but like in entrepreneurship, as you very well know, it's got to be very strong. Like it's got to be perfect as far as fit of the team, or close to it. And so like, a lot of tough decisions have to be made on not only my side, but on their side. And like, and get it. And you can't procrastinate on these decisions either. Like everybody's got to come to the decision quickly. So.
Well, you can't have just one toe in the pool, Dan. You got to be either swimming laps or you get out of the pool entirely. There's no in between, which,
100%.
we're forced to learn sometimes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think everyone goes through that at one point or another. Dan, tell me this, like, how are you balancing your role as kind of a developer as well as an entrepreneur, especially as CEO, facing technical and business challenges simultaneously? How are you managing some of that stuff on the day to day?
Yeah, that's been definitely challenging. I'd say that's one of the bigger challenges. So right now, yeah, I'm building out the product. I'm the only one building it out on the engineering side, and so ultimately, we have a good vision for it, and as Matt and Daniela are like selling and like doing the product work, and I'm doing the building, then it's a good balance. But it's also like being the CEO, I've also got to be very much on top of the vision and like be close to our customers as well. And so balancing that has been kind of an exercise. I think that ultimately we're in a spot where we know that the best thing we can do is launch a good product as soon as possible. And so I feel pretty comfortable spending the vast majority of my time doing the development right now. But just making sure that we stay regularly in sync, have good channels of communication set up, have good principles, and have our like culture all clearly defined. I think that's how it's helped us kind of develop this culture where we can kind of put on these different hats and spend our time like working in certain ways and always be able to return back to the basics and have a good foundation.
Totally. And it does sound a little bit cliche, but communication is just so key, especially when you're working with a team of 3 to 10 people. What we started doing is every single email, the whole team is CC'd, even if it has nothing to do with them, just because having that communication and kind of open book policy, just so everyone's in the know regardless, has been really helpful for us, especially in these early stages. It just is really critical to ensure that there's a lot to do and not a lot of hours in the day and not a lot of manpower, especially during these early days, as I mentioned. So it's like you have to do literally everything you can to stay organized and make sure that everyone's in the know, because maybe it's not relevant to them today, but it could be next week. And it's, beneficial to make sure everyone has eyes and visibility to every single thing that's going on within the company, because there's 3 people.
Yeah. And it kind of strikes me, like it reminds me of another like challenge that's kind of related is like the planning. Like how much planning do you go through? Like how much of that is done on your own side, and how much should you be doing with the other co-founders? Because you don't want to over plan and you don't want to leave like people out. And over planning is gonna ultimately like not work out anyway. You're going to end up pivoting, and unless that delivers some structure to your mind that you didn't previously had, then it's not going to be useful. But at the same time, if you don't plan enough, then you're just going to be zigzagging and never like get to an optimum. So I think that's a related challenge.
Totally. And speaking of challenges, Dan, would you say that the biggest adversity hurdle that you've faced so far has been understanding who your team is, especially back in the day when you're trying to figure out who's all in, who's just talented and is just here to get the credit? I mean, talk to me a little bit about the adversity you've faced since the genesis of XProd.
I'd say that, yeah. I'd say, yeah. The short answer is yes. That's been the hardest thing, is like knowing how to make the decisions about like, what team to have, right? Because there's, like we talked about the talent versus like buy-in, and it's easy to say, but sometimes it's harder to see in the moment, and you might think that like some talent will be worth it. Oh, maybe I can slip up on my criteria a little bit here, but so I think that's been the most challenging thing. I think the other challenging thing is that we hear a lot of different things from a lot of different stakeholders, whether you're talking to like potential investors, potential customers, people who are like in related fields, but not necessarily like, and are really knowledgeable there, but maybe not quite as much in your field. They all like say something different and all have different opinions about which parts are going to be valuable and which parts are going to work. And even like among the co-founders, we have our disagreements, which are of course very valuable to have. And so picking the signal from the noise there is something that has been definitely challenging and a muscle that like really had to build, because you don't want to, of course, great innovators throughout history have been able to hear like the adversity and hear people who disagree and be able to proceed with the vision, having that steadfast kind of like confidence. But you don't want to diverge into the territory of being like hallucinatory where you're just like going blindly. And so finding that balance, I think, has also been challenging, but I think we're in a good spot with it now.
Yeah, well, to your point about having disagreements, I mean, it's a really powerful tool, if you will, especially in the world we live in, because it's like you kind of almost want to have disagreements every once in a while just to make sure that you're staying on your toes, right? And getting some of that feedback from people who are as in as you are is really valuable, especially when you're in a vulnerable state. I mean, you've come up with your own idea and you're executing your own company. It's no time to hope that there'll be potential positive feedback from the market, or that you think it's a great, I mean, because how often do we hear, oh, I had a startup and it failed and I thought my idea was really great and then it just went south. It's
Yeah.
like, getting that feedback, having those conversations, getting that constructive criticism, whether it be from inside or outside the company, is like huge. You need it,
Yeah.
to survive.
Yeah, and we very much believe that. Like we have two key like values that we think that there are a lot of key values, right? But two that we want to remember that aren't quite as obvious as like as some other ones, I think are the one you just listed, right? Like we always want to be very forthcoming in a very candid way about disagreements. We think it's critical, and if we're not, then it will kill us. The other one is like doing these things that require or that have the potential to deliver non-linear returns, right? And I'm sure somebody coined that phrase that I'm not crediting right now, but just things that have the potential to really exponentially improve our position in clever different ways. So those are really the two big things that we try to focus on a lot at XProd.
Yeah, totally. And I want to piggyback off that a little bit into the more positive side of building a startup and why we do this. So for you, like, what does a success mean to you beyond the metrics and the milestones, and the small wins? I mean, what do you think kind of your purpose is beyond, the idea of having a successful company, revenue, raising funding, and what have you? What are you doing? Where's your head at with all this?
Yeah. So I'm reading this great book, Innovators by Walter Isaacson right now. And it's like this really entertaining narrative about how like computers and the internet and all that started. And it talks about like a lot of the different like dynamics that happen between like the founders and the researchers and everything, and what things didn't work. And really when I'm doing that, it's just inspiring to see like I use these inventions every day, and everything that we do, like, is a lot of what we do is built on the shoulders of these giants, right? And so they had some different ways of building products faster and getting innovation to happen faster. And ultimately that's delivered the things that we're using today. If we can help accelerate that process and we can help product leaders choose the right products to build, then we can help accelerate that innovation process even faster. And so more people like me in 50 years from now, like, can be standing there and sitting there and thinking, oh, like, we're standing on the shoulders of even higher giants. So we want to help product leaders build better products, essentially, is the idea.
I think that's a great response, and it's so important to kind of know your why, if you will. And for me, like, working in AI, it's like, that's easy. It's one of the most revolutionary things that our society has seen probably since the mainstream introduction of the internet. And to be able to play a part in that industry as a whole, and something that's so relevant and forthcoming, and that's obviously going to be around for a long time, especially as it develops further, is huge. And so, no,
Yeah.
I think it's a great answer, and it kind of leads me to my last question, which you kind of answered here. But would you say that what you just described for me has been your aha moment so far with this process? Like, where you physically felt like things are going well just because of the reason why you're doing this, and that's kind of the propeller pushing you forward in terms of what we're actually doing here and in the direction of XProd as a whole?
Yeah, I think that is definitely like the one of the like underlying forces there. I think that the other one is like feeling like not only do we have a good cause, but we have like the right way, the right mechanism to apply to achieve it. And so I think that those two different things are kind of self-fulfilling processes, in that if we put those together the right way, then we see like then and we keep putting one foot in front of the other, then hopefully we get some lucky breaks. And that's what we've seen. We've seen that that customers kind of seek us out and are looking to looking to try the product and everything. And so we think that that's those are the two biggest things.
It's a great start, man. And it's a great story. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing where you're at with us, where you started and where you're looking to go, Dan. So congratulations. And to wrap up here, do you have anything else that you wanted to plug or say before we sign off?
Yeah, well, if you're a product leader in in B2B SaaS company, XProd's going to be launching in the next few weeks. And so please check us out at XProd.ai.
Fantastic, man. Well, congrats again. Me and my team will certainly be pulling for you, obviously, and keeping an eye on your progress.
Likewise.
Obviously, a lot of steps already, and looking forward to seeing where you guys go. So congrats again, and we're rooting for you.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers, Dan. Thanks for being on. Talk to you soon.